He told me he didn't love me anymore, and then he went to sleep in my bed like nothing had changed. I remember lying there next to him, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how someone could say something like that and still stay. I thought maybe it was just a phase, maybe he was overwhelmed, maybe I just needed to give him space and everything would go back to normal. Because that's what you do when you love someone. You don't walk away at the first sign of distance. You try harder. The thing is, it wasn't his place. The apartment was mine. I was the one paying the rent, the bills, the groceries, all of it. And he knew that. He didn't have a stable job at the time, and I told myself I was supporting him, that this was temporary, that couples go through things like this. So when he said he didn't feel the same anymore, I didn't tell him to leave. I told him it was okay. I told him we could figure it out. And I meant it. The next morning I woke up early and made breakfast like I always did. Eggs, toast, coffee the way he liked it. I even set his plate down in front of him with a smile, like if I acted normal enough, we could somehow undo what he said the night before. He barely looked at me. He muttered a quiet thanks without meeting my eyes, scrolling through his phone like I wasn't even there. That was the moment I felt it for the first time, that shift, like I was already losing him, but didn't want to admit it. Still, I stayed. I told myself people don't just stop loving someone overnight. There had to be a reason, something I could fix if I just paid attention, if I just became a better version of myself. So I started trying. I cleaned more, cooked more, smiled more. I stopped bringing up anything that could turn into an argument. I became careful with my words, careful with my tone, careful with everything, like one wrong move could push him further away. And he stayed. But not really. He was there physically, sitting on the couch, walking through the apartment, sleeping in the same bed, but everything else about him felt distant. Conversations got shorter. His answers turned into one-word replies. Sometimes I would talk and realize he wasn't even listening. At night, he would turn his back to me. No good night. No touch, nothing. Just silence. And somehow, that silence hurt more than if he had just left. Because leaving would have been clear. This wasn't. This was him staying in my life while slowly disappearing from it, and I kept telling myself that if I just held on a little longer, he would come back. Looking back, now that was the moment I should have let him go. But I didn't. At first, I convinced myself that this was something I could fix, that maybe love doesn't just disappear but gets buried under stress, routine, or whatever he was going through, and if I just became a little more patient, a little more understanding, a little more perfect, he would find his way back to me. So I started changing in ways that didn't even feel like me anymore. I paid more attention to how I looked, even on days when I felt exhausted, choosing outfits I knew he used to like, doing my makeup a little more carefully, catching myself in the mirror, and wondering when I had started trying this hard just to be seen by someone who used to notice me without effort. I cooked his favorite meals more often, making sure everything was exactly how he liked it, hoping that something as simple as a familiar taste could remind him of what we had, as if love could be brought back through routine and small comforts. I stopped bringing up anything serious, even when something bothered me, because I was afraid that any kind of pressure would push him further away, and instead I chose softness every single time, even when it meant swallowing my own feelings. And for a while, I told myself it was working because he was still there, still coming home, still sitting across from me at the table, still existing in the same space, and I clung to that like it meant something. But then the small things started to change. At first, it was just little shifts that were easy to ignore, like how he began keeping his phone face down more often, or how he would suddenly leave the room to take calls he never used to hide, his voice dropping lower, as if the walls themselves could hear him. Sometimes, late in the evening, he would say he needed to step out for a bit, and I wouldn't ask questions because I had already trained myself not to, telling myself that trust meant not needing explanations, even when something in my chest felt tight and uneasy. There were nights when he didn't come home at all, and when I asked the next day, trying to sound casual instead of desperate, he would shrug and say he crashed at a friend's place, as if that was something completely normal, as if I wasn't lying awake the entire night staring at the door, waiting to hear it open. What hurt the most wasn't even the distance. It was how easily he acted like nothing had changed, like I wasn't supposed to notice, like I wasn't supposed to feel the way everything between us was quietly falling apart. And the worst part is that I still tried to believe him. I told myself that if I stayed calm, if I didn't accuse him of anything, if I just kept being the easy, understanding version of myself, he would eventually realize what he was risking, what he was slowly losing. I thought I was holding our relationship together. I didn't realize I was the only one left in it. I wish I could say that I found out in some dramatic, undeniable way, like walking in on something I couldn't ignore, but the truth is, it started with something much smaller, something that could have been explained away if I wanted to believe him badly enough. It was an ordinary evening, the kind that had started to feel routine in the worst possible way, quiet, distant, filled with the kind of silence that isn't peaceful but heavy, like something unspoken is sitting between you, and neither of you is willing to touch it. He was in the shower, and his phone was on the coffee table, lighting up briefly before going dark again. I didn't reach for it right away. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the screen as if it might disappear on its own, as if ignoring it would somehow make everything okay, because deep down I already felt that something wasn't right, and I was afraid that if I looked, I wouldn't be able to pretend anymore. But curiosity doesn't feel like curiosity when you're in that state. It feels like pressure, like something building inside your chest that won't let you breathe until you know. So I picked it up. The message was still there. Can't wait to see you tonight. Same hotel. I remember reading it once and not fully understanding it, like my brain refused to process the words in the order they were written, and then reading it again, slower this time, feeling something cold spread through my body as the meaning settled in. For a second, everything went completely quiet. Not the room, not the world, just something inside me, like all the noise I had been carrying for weeks suddenly stopped, replaced by this sharp, heavy stillness that made it hard to even move. I didn't scroll. I didn't open anything else. I just stood there holding his phone, staring at that one message like it was enough to explain everything I had been trying not to see. And then I heard the water turn off. My first instinct wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness, it was panic. Not because of what I had just read, but because I didn't know what to do with it, because a part of me still wanted it to mean something else, anything else, something that didn't force me to accept what was right in front of me. So I put the phone back exactly where it was and sat down like nothing had happened, trying to slow my breathing, trying to arrange my face into something normal before he walked back into the room. When he came out, everything about him felt the same casual movement, the same quiet presence, the same distance that had become normal, and for a second I almost convinced myself that I had imagined it. But I hadn't. I asked him about it later, carefully, like stepping onto thin ice, choosing my words in a way that wouldn't sound like an accusation, even though my heart was already racing. I mentioned the message. I didn't repeat it exactly. I just asked and he didn't hesitate. He laughed, lightly, almost dismissively, like the whole thing was too insignificant to even take seriously, and told me it was nothing, just someone from work, something about a meeting that got phrased weirdly, something that didn't even deserve the kind of reaction I was having. Then he looked at me in that way, the one that made me feel like I was the problem, like I was overthinking, overreacting, turning nothing into something. "You're reading into things again," he said, calm and confident, like he had done nothing wrong. And I wanted to argue. I wanted to say that it didn't make sense, that it didn't sound like work, that it sounded like something else entirely, something I didn't even want to say out loud. But instead I nodded, because believing him felt easier than accepting the truth. Because if I believed him, I didn't have to admit that everything I had been trying to fix was already broken in a way I couldn't repair. So I let it go. Or at least I pretended to. But something had already shifted. And no matter how hard I tried after that, I couldn't unsee what I had seen. For a few days after that, I tried to go back to how things were, telling myself that I had chosen to believe him and that I needed to commit to that choice, even though something inside me refused to settle, like a quiet voice that kept repeating the same thought over and over again, asking questions I didn't want to answer. I watched him more closely without making it obvious, noticing how often he checked his phone, how quickly he turned the screen away, how his attention seemed to belong somewhere else even when he was sitting right next to me. And then one evening, he said he was going out. He didn't offer details, just something vague about meeting someone, his tone casual in a way that almost felt practice, like he had said the same kind of thing before and knew exactly how it would sound. I nodded like I always did. I didn't ask where. I didn't ask with who. I just said, okay, and watched him leave, closing the door behind him like it was any other night. But this time I didn't stay. I gave it a few minutes, enough for it not to look obvious even to myself, and then I grabbed my keys and followed. The drive felt longer than it actually was, my hands tight on the steering wheel, my thoughts moving faster than I could keep up with, part of me still hoping I was wrong, that I would get there and find nothing, that I could go home and laugh at myself for even doubting him. But I already knew. I just needed to see it. When I pulled up near the hotel, I parked a little further away, far enough that I wouldn't be noticed, and sat there for a moment, staring at the entrance like it held some kind of answer I wasn't ready for. People were coming and going, couples mostly, moving in and out without hesitation, without fear, like they belonged there. I almost left. For a second, I really considered turning the car around and going home, choosing not to know, choosing the version of reality, where everything was still uncertain instead of confirmed. But then I saw him. He was standing just outside the entrance, looking relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in a long time, his posture easy, his expression lighter, like whatever weight he carried at home didn't exist here. And he wasn't alone. She walked up to him like she had done it before. Like this wasn't new, like this wasn't their first time meeting in a place like this, and the way he looked at her was enough to make everything inside me go completely still. It wasn't just the fact that he was there with someone else. It was how different he was. He smiled at her. Not the small, distracted smile he gave me out of habit, but something real, something effortless, something I hadn't seen directed at me in weeks. She said something I couldn't hear, and he laughed, reaching out to touch her arm in a way that felt natural, familiar, like his body already knew her. Like she wasn't new. Like I was the one who didn't belong anymore. I sat there, watching, unable to look away, even though every second made it harder to breathe, feeling that quiet, heavy realization settle deeper with every small detail I hadn't wanted to see before. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't something that had just started. This was something that had been happening while I was at home, trying to fix a relationship he had already stepped out of. For a moment, I thought I might get out of the car, that I might walk up to them and force everything into the open, demand answers, make him explain himself in front of both of us. But I didn't move, because suddenly I didn't want answers. I didn't want explanations. I didn't want anything from him at all. I just sat there, watching them walk inside together without hesitation, without guilt, without even a glance back, like there was nothing left behind that mattered. And for the first time, the thought of losing him didn't hurt the way it used to. What hurt was realizing how long I had been holding on to someone who had already let go. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not loudly, and not dramatically. Just quietly, completely. I didn't want him back anymore. I wanted him to feel what I felt. After that night, I didn't confront him. I didn't bring it up, didn't ask questions, didn't let him see that anything had changed, because something inside me had already gone quiet in a way I couldn't undo, like a switch had flipped, and all the energy I used to spend trying to fix us simply disappeared. Instead of trying harder, I stopped. Not in a dramatic way, not all at once, but in small, almost unnoticeable shifts that added up to something he didn't recognize right away. I stopped waiting for him to come home. I stopped asking where he was going. I stopped shaping my day around his presence, his mood, his needs. And the strange part was, he didn't question it. If anything, he seemed more relaxed, like the tension he used to avoid had finally disappeared, like this version of me, quiet, easy, undemanding, was exactly what he wanted all along. He started coming home a little earlier sometimes, sitting on the couch like he belonged there, scrolling through his phone without a care in the world, completely unaware of how much had already changed. And I let him believe everything was fine. Because this time, I wasn't trying to save anything. I was preparing to end it. A few days later, I reached out to someone from work. His name was Daniel, and he was the kind of man people notice the second he walks into a room, not because he tries to draw attention but because he doesn't need to. He carried himself with this quiet confidence that made everything about him feel steady, grounded, like he knew exactly who he was and didn't need anyone else to confirm it. We had always gotten along well, but this wasn't something I would normally ask anyone. Still, when I explained the situation, keeping it simple, leaving out the parts that didn't need to be said out loud, he didn't hesitate. He just listened, nodded, and agreed. No judgment and no unnecessary questions. Just a calm, easy, I've got you. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something that wasn't anxiety or exhaustion. I felt supported. We didn't plan anything complicated. There was no need. All I asked was for him to walk in with me, to be there, to make it clear without saying too much that I wasn't alone anymore. That I had already stepped out of the space he thought he still occupied in my life. The evening we chose felt strangely normal. I texted him earlier that day, letting him know I'd be home a little later, keeping my tone light, familiar, exactly the way it had been before everything changed. When I got off work, Daniel was already waiting outside. He smiled when he saw me, that easy, natural kind of smile that didn't feel forced or complicated, and for a second I realized how different it felt to be around someone who actually looked at me like I was there, like I mattered. We walked in together. Not too close, not exaggerated, just enough that it was clear. Just enough. When I opened the door, he was exactly where I expected him to be, sitting on the couch, phone in his hand, completely at ease, like the apartment was still his, like nothing in his life was about to change. He looked up when he heard the door. And then he froze. His eyes moved from me to Daniel and back again, confusion settling on his face in a way I had never seen before, like for the first time, he didn't understand what was happening. "Who is this?" he asked, standing up slowly, his voice tight in a way that told me he was already trying to regain control of a situation that had slipped out of his hands. I didn't rush. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain more than I needed to. I just met his eyes, calm in a way that surprised even me, and said, "Someone who doesn't stay where he's not wanted." The silence that followed felt different from all the others we had shared before. This one wasn't heavy. It was clear. And then, without looking away, without softening the words, without giving him the space to twist anything into something else, I said the one thing I should have said weeks ago. "You need to leave. Today." For a second, he didn't say anything. He just stood there, looking at me like he was trying to figure out which part of this was real and which part he could still control, like he was waiting for me to break first, to soften, to take it back the way I always had before, but I didn't. Something about the way he looked at me felt different now, not because he had changed, but because I had, because for the first time I wasn't searching his face for reassurance, wasn't trying to read between his words, wasn't hoping he would say the right thing to make everything okay again. He opened his mouth like he was about to argue, then hesitated, his eyes flicking briefly toward Daniel, as if suddenly aware that he wasn't the only one in the room anymore, that whatever dynamic we had before no longer worked in his favor. "It's not what you think," he said finally, his voice quieter now, less certain, like he was testing which version of the story I was willing to believe. I didn't react. Not to the words, not to the tone, not to the familiar pattern of excuses that used to pull me back in every single time. Because I had already seen enough. He took a step closer, his expression shifting into something softer, something almost convincing if I had known better, and for a brief moment, I could see the version of him I used to hold on to, the one who knew exactly how to say things in a way that made me doubt myself instead of him. "We can fix this," he added more quickly now, like he was trying to catch up to a moment that had already passed. That was the part that almost made me smile. Not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. I let a small pause settle between us. just long enough for the weight of everything unsaid to sit where it belonged. And then I spoke, keeping my voice steady, almost gentle, the way you would talk to someone you no longer needed anything from. You stopped loving me, I said, watching him carefully, not for a reaction, but for confirmation. His expression tightened slightly, like he wasn't expecting me to say it that directly, that clearly. But you stayed. I continued, just as calm, just as steady. And that's what broke me. This time, he didn't interrupt. He didn't argue. He just stood there, looking at me in a way that finally made sense, like he was starting to realize that whatever hold he thought he had was already gone, that the version of me he relied on no longer existed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't repeat myself. I didn't need to. The meaning was already clear. He looked around the apartment for a moment, as if seeing it differently now, as if noticing for the first time that none of it was his, that everything he had treated like something temporary, something he could come and go from, was never actually his to begin with. Daniel didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to make the shift undeniable, enough to make it clear that I wasn't standing there alone anymore, waiting for someone who had already left in every way that mattered. Eventually, he nodded. Not in agreement, not in understanding, but in that quiet way people do when they realize they've run out of options, when there's nothing left to say that will change the outcome. He didn't try again. He didn't argue. He just turned, slowly, like the space itself no longer belonged to him, and walked toward the bedroom to gather his things. I didn't follow, and I didn't watch. I just stood there, feeling something unfamiliar settle in my chest, not relief exactly, not happiness, but something quieter, something steadier, like the absence of a weight I had been carrying for so long I had forgotten what it felt like without it. When the door finally closed behind him, the sound didn't echo the way I thought it would. It didn't feel like an ending. It felt like something had been returned to me. I looked around the apartment, at the same walls, the same furniture, the same space that had felt so heavy for weeks, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like mine again. Not because he was gone, but because I finally was. So tell me if someone tells you they don't love you anymore but still stays, still eats at your table, still sleeps in your bed like nothing has changed. Are they confused, or are they just comfortable? And how long would you let someone stay in your life? Once you realize you're the only one still in it? If stories like this hit you, subscribe.